the songwriter doesn't write a song that to speak to a million people. They write a love song to resonate with one person. And then once it resonates with one person, it will resonate with a million people. So it's like, if you just really focus that message and you can deliver that one thing that hits home, it will stick. And in this case, make a very long lasting impact.
It's just like my mom saying, well, I use Facebook. I don't understand why social media marketing is important. Just because you have been doing something doesn't mean you are intentionally great at it. Everybody says, I can speak, therefore I communicate. No, patently false.
Question one. So who are you and what do you do?
My name is Jonathan Pritchard, and I'm the founder of an international consulting company called the Hellstrom Group, which helps train Fortune 500 companies in communication skills, sales, negotiation, and presentation skills.
How did you go from being an entertainer to more of a corporate expert?
It's kind of one of those things of you don't know what you know, and it's difficult to appreciate how valuable it is until somebody else can see it. I believe a lifetime of traveling the world as a performer who's performed in Vegas, entertained the troops stationed overseas, as constantly selling my mind reading show, which is solely the function of applied psychology, showmanship, and gumption. From a lifetime's worth of putting it into practice, I now teach people how it all works in the context of life and business. Looking back, it's kind of obvious, but in the middle of it, it's not. Traveling around, working these gorgeous theaters, performing in Vegas, the whole 9 yards. And then talking to people after the show, they're just like, how in the world do you do what you do? Meaning like, all right, how do the tricks work? But also, how in the world do you make it work as a performer? I don't get it, because you're not going to the office and you're telling me you make a living at this. So I would talk to people after the shows. And then a couple of years after those kinds of conversations started, got emails back being like, hey, thanks for sharing your ideas on this. Here's what I did after our conversation, and life couldn't be better. And it was that was the first peek into, wait a minute, the way I think about things isn't normal. Not everybody had the same exposure to ideas as I've had. The psychological principles that make my whole show work, I've been applying those principles in my own life to be able to do ridiculously awesome stuff. Maybe there's value in telling people about this and not just keeping it a secret. So that was the kind of slow transition between just, and I'm putting that in air quotes, just a performer, into kind of sharing the behind the scenes strategy, recognizing opportunity, the gumption, the just making things happen approach that you got to have as a self-employed performer. I've had to be in sales my entire life because nobody's coming to me to buy my show. I'm having to go to them. So that's marketing. That's sales. Oh, I'm having to negotiate these huge contracts every single time. So, okay, I've got insight to these dynamics that every business relies on. And that was the beginning of being a corporate consultant, to go in and train these businesses on how to do this stuff.
So much of content creation or providing the stuff starts with entertaining, and I think so often people think the stuff I provide has to be informative or it has to be educational. So that's one aspect, but also just the simple fact of entertaining is also a form of value that you deliver. It's why we go to the movies. It's why we go see magicians and go see comedians. We give money for things that we get value out of. It doesn't just need to be like skill sets.
Exactly. Not all value is dollars.
People are really only going to remember one thing, right? Like you might show them 3, maybe 5 things, but at that point you're starting to overload them. And there's just going to be one thing that actually imprints and sticks with them. And it's probably going to be the thing that most resonates with them the most. So ideally, your audience so you can get to that point or be more strategic about delivering that message. But really, it's just going to be one thing.
Exactly. And so it's really helping my clients pare down the important stuff that actually needs to be communicated and delivering it in the way that an audience member will hear it, not just the way that a client wants it said.
So I went to a seminar and the speaker said something along the lines of, the songwriter doesn't write a song that to speak to a million people. They write a love song to resonate with one person. And then once it resonates with one person, it will resonate with a million people. So it's like, if you just really focus that message and you can deliver that one thing that hits home, it will stick. And in this case, make a very long lasting impact.
To me, I think the most value for folks would be talking about the value of communication, because it really is the fundamental substrate of value. Because to me, relationships are the most powerful force in our life. And that is the relationship you have with yourself. What's the story you tell yourself about how you've gotten here? What's the relationship to your resources? What's the relationship to your problems, to your opportunities? What are the relationships to your family, to your friends, to your business? Everything is relationships. That's it. And the quality of that connection, of those relationships, the upper ceiling is your communication skills. That's it. I legit sit down and then think about my mom sitting across the table from me, and then explain this to my mom, and then imagine what questions she would have, and then answer them in a way that my mom would get it. And then people go, man, your stuff is so easy to read. It's like, gee, I wonder why. It's because I write for one person, my mom, and everybody else is along for the ride.
The hardest part about creating content is getting in that mindset. So like sitting down, going, okay, who am I talking to? Who am I sitting across? Because if you were actually sitting across from someone you can visualize, someone like this, here's your mom. Sometimes I think of like a grandparent or something. It's like, if I want to get this across, if they were across the table from me, what are the things that I would say? Like, I wouldn't talk about the complex details or like how the stuff works. I would just keep it as simple as possible to get that message across. And part of getting that mindset is also being aware of what their awareness is. So like, if you're talking to a very technical audience, say engineers, sure, you can get a little more technical. They want more information. There's a level of understanding already that you can skip over. But if their awareness is very low, you have to start from the beginning and keep it simple.
And magicians have had that understanding since forever. And in the magic world, that's called sight lines. Imagine you're an illusionist and you're relying heavily on smoke and mirrors. Well, in order for the mirror to work properly, it has to be at the right angle. Well, what governs the right angle? Where the audience member is sitting. So you have to be extraordinarily aware of where your audience member is sitting and what they would be able to see from that perspective. So you literally have to know what it is that they're looking at and the angle that they're seeing it and what they're going to be thinking based off their perspective. So it's a great metaphorical insight, but it's also literally true from a physics perspective if you want your mirror to reflect the right thing. If your delivery team takes communication courses, they're going to be more effective at communicating the value that they're bringing to your clients. So that's a huge one. Anybody on the delivery side should absolutely take public speaking courses, or at least learn how to do a magic trick. Because I've seen so many folks who are on the engineering side treat human beings like robots. And no preamble, here's what we're doing, and just miss the human connection dimension of relationships. So it's all based off communication skills. That's all it is.
Like self-awareness and self-reflection and that relationship you have with yourself is so critical. And that really is the foundation of everything moving forward, because the better you can reflect or be aware of what you do or what you think or those conversations you have with yourself, the better your communication will be with other people. Because communication is difficult. There's a lot of attributes going on with every single message. It's what's the relationship between the people, what's the pre-context of that each person has with what you're talking about, how they feel about these topics. So communication alone is extremely challenging, and I think we take it for granted because we do it all the time without actually reflecting on it.
It's just like my mom saying, well, I use Facebook. I don't understand why social media marketing is important. Just because you have been doing something doesn't mean you are intentionally great at it. And you're exactly right. Everybody says, I can speak, therefore I communicate. No, patently false. Because if you've never been consciously aware of the principles at play, how intentional can you be at executing at a high level. That's like saying you do something great when you're asleep. Like, now, when you're conscious and aware of life, you're much more capable at achieving some intended outcome.
What's the biggest mistake you've made that still impacts what you do today?
I once got booed by 2,000 people, and every single one of those people were people who book entertainers like me. So if it had gone the other way, I would have been booked for years. But instead, I screwed up in so many ways. It's a whole hour's worth conversation of context to explain the number of ways I messed up to go through it. But long story short is I got booed with the agent that represented me. The silent partner of that agency was in the back of the room. My mentor, who had never seen me perform at that time, he's really big in the world of mentalism, and he happened to be at the conference. I specifically invited him to be in the back of the room to watch me work, and I crashed and burned and got flop sweats through the whole thing. That was what inoculated me against failure, because I lived through it. I still got booked. And from that point on, I went, I can fail like crazy and still make it through. Not that failure is going to be my desired outcome. Its sting isn't quite so bad anymore because I've literally lived through the worst possible scenario you could ever possibly imagine as a performer and made it through the other side. So that made me fearless.
Or whenever you experience it, it does make the next steps, puts the next steps into perspective. Shouldn't say makes them easier, but it does definitely create some perspective on what could happen next. Some of the things that we covered here, one, just gaining experience will help. Reflecting on that experience and then constantly be learning. So gaining new skills will really change how you communicate, will change how you see the world, how you move through it. Because like you said, the biggest and most important thing is communication, not just with other people, but with yourself. It will open up so much opportunity. It will change things. I think it's also one of those things too, where people are like, oh, this person always seems to land on their feet, or they're so lucky. It's like, well, like we know luck is only a small part of it, like timing and opportunity, but also so much of it is your preparedness, the skills, the experiences you have going into that situation.
In my experience of working with thousands and thousands of people, I almost always see folks blame the listener for not understanding. So yeah, the number of people who are willing to accept the responsibility that communication is what the other person hears from you is way different than what you're trying to say. It will free up more opportunity the more languages you could speak. And you could mean that in a literal way. It's like, I'm very, very slowly learning Mandarin Chinese because to me, that's really cool. Once I'm at least restaurant fluent, I could at least go to thousands more restaurants and have opportunities and experiences that I wouldn't be able to have otherwise. So learning more languages opens up more relationships. So these different ways of thinking about fundamental human experience is just really cool. And again, it's just a more and more skillful use of the tools that everybody is blindly knocking around in the dark about. Learning fundamental human psychology kind of turns the light on and gives you admin access to all these abilities and skills that most people think is impossible.
Doing the things other people won't do will put you ahead. So like if someone is shy or scared, if you do those things day in, day out, you'll naturally start to get ahead because there's so many things that people will, quote unquote, shy away from doing. For me, that was actually my thing when I first started one of my businesses in university. I was super shy, super scared. And the only way that we could generate leads was literally knocking on doors. So I'd walk around to house knocking on doors, and every door I was terrified, absolutely terrified. But I put in 3 years of doing it. I would say I'm no longer terrified, but I learned what that feeling is, how to deal with the feeling, how to move through it, how to use my vision and goals to overcome, in this case, these natural emotions that I have. I don't know about you, but I remember initially thinking one day these feelings will go away. And what I learned is they don't necessarily go away. You just understand their place. You can put them into perspective and understand how to work with them.
Mm-hmm. I understand what it's trying to tell me. I've heard you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's not a removal. It's not a suppressing. It's not an ignoring. It's not a denial. It's more of a, yeah, okay, it's there, but this is what I'm going to be doing anyway. So thanks.
Yeah. And then last question here. What's one invaluable lesson you carry with you today?
I think part of it is it's your fault. That is such a wonderful, terrifying, empowering belief. On average, the life you're living is the sum aggregate of the decisions you've made, right? That whole 10% what happens to you, 90% what you decide to do about it. If you can't take radical ownership of the decisions you've made, you're also giving up the ability to make any meaningful change about it. So even if it wasn't your fault, it can still be your responsibility. And moving forward, you can live with that radical self-accountability and focus solely on doing what you can do about things instead of spending 1 second blaming somebody else or why didn't you just whatever. Just not wasting any of your energy focusing on trying to manage somebody else's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, but focusing solely on, well, what can I do about it if this were my fault in the first place?
Yeah, I think it's whether it's, social economical situations, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's just other people, the common denominator is how you react in these situations. So not saying you're all of a sudden you're going to become a millionaire, you're going to be extremely successful, but you have a choice on the decisions you make, on where you spend and focus your time, on what you say yes and no to, and then even how you communicate with other people. It's what you have control, and I love that quote, that it's about extreme ownership.
Right, because the way I explain it to myself is if it's not my fault for the failure, I will never be able to own the success either. And if it's always somebody else's responsibility or fault, therefore I'm at the whim of others. And that's a really tough way to go through life.